Hello and welcome to this episode of the Movement Prescription podcast, where I interview Professor Jason Gill. He's a professor of cardiometabolic health at the University of Glasgow, and he leads a multidisciplinary research group investigating the prevention and management of vascular and metabolic diseases, including obesity and type 2 diabetes. Today we cover all sorts of topics. He's absolutely no nonsense. I think my favourite line from Jason is, "How little can we get away with?" Listen in to hear more. So, Jason, thank you so much for coming along today to chat to me about physical activity and metabolic health. I'm here today with Professor Jason Gill, who is a professor of cardiometabolic health from the University of Glasgow. Jason, thank you so much.
Thank you, Suzy. I'm delighted to be here.
So I'm actually just going to start with a very simple question, Jason, because some people may not be that familiar with cardiometabolic health as a concept. It's a pretty emerging specialty. Could you tell us a little bit about that and about yourself?
So thank you, Suzy. So cardiometabolic health, I like to think of it as the things which influence your risk of developing cardiometabolic disease. So heart disease and diabetes principally, but also chronic kidney disease and all sorts of diseases like that. And metabolic health is essentially how good your body is at maintaining homeostasis. So we look at things like your glucose concentrations, your insulin concentrations, your lipid levels, your blood pressure. And the idea is these are all in sort of normal ranges, and this reduces your risk of developing these diseases. But also, the effect of perturbations on these is a little bit less. So if you have good metabolic health, what happens when you eat a meal which contains fat and carbohydrate is you get a smaller spike in your blood sugar, you get a smaller spike in insulin, you get a smaller spike in your triglycerides. And so your body is just better able to cope with all the stresses that it's facing in everyday life.
Brilliant. Excellent. And tell me, Jason, how did you end up being a professor in cardiometabolic health? Because it's probably not a normal pathway for doctors to end up there. So tell us a little bit about that.
So one thing. So I'm a scientist. I'm a PhD doctor, not a medical doctor. I did my first degree at Loughborough University, and it was a joint honours degree in physics and sports science. I was a reasonably good triathlete when I was younger, and I was interested in sort of things to make people run faster and things like that. And then during my degree, I became more interested in the effects of physical activity on health for everybody that's not trying to be an elite athlete. So I did an MSc in sports science. My PhD was looking at exercise and lipoprotein metabolism. So principally how exercise influenced the way that your body handled fat in food. I then came to Glasgow about 26 years ago to start a postdoc looking at the effects of monounsaturated fats, so olive oil type fats on lipoprotein metabolism. We did some studies looking at lipoprotein kinetics, and then basically I stayed for the next quarter century, and I got various promotions through the system, and I've ended up where I am today. So my work now is pretty broad. I do work on epidemiology, trying to understand how factors such as diet and physical activity and obesity and ethnicity influence health. I do work to try and understand the biological mechanisms via which, so what is it that exercise or diet does to the body which influences health? And also work on interventions. So how can we support people to make changes which they might be able to sustainably do to change their health? And I'm very interested in what works in the real world. So I'm interested in what's good enough and what works, and which is a slightly different question from, say, somebody trying to optimize their performance to run a marathon or win a medal. So I'm interested in what works for most people in the population.
This is absolute music to my ears. And I guess for many people who hopefully will be tuning into the podcast, healthcare workers who are trying to do this in their day-to-day. But you're giving us the evidence base behind that, but a very practical, real-world evidence base. You are a prolific researcher. I see that from your bio that you sent me that you've published over 200 peer-reviewed papers, and you've given us an idea of the breadth of those papers. And you've contributed to loads of the guidelines, UK ones, signed guidelines, NICE guidelines. So, really good to know that all of that sort of practical background is going into those. Because there is often that sort of implementation gap.
Yeah, so what's really interesting is we probably broadly know what we should be doing. The challenge is it's hard to do it in real life. So what's the word? It's simple but not easy, or is it easy but not simple? I can't remember. It's one of those two way rounds. But basically what to do is fairly straightforward, but doing it in the real world is really, really hard. So I'm interested in finding out what people need to do. And I'm kind of interested in the question that a lot of people ask me about is how little can you get away with? Because for most people, what you eat and how active you are isn't the number one priority in your life. And it's often for people who it isn't the number one priority that it's probably the most important for. So the question is, what is it that we can do to try and get most of the way there in a way that's sustainable and fits in with people's real lives? And a key challenge is things that people are able to do for years to decades. So one of the things is you sometimes see this idea that people need to do a 100-day plan, right? So I'm more interested in 1,000-day plans. So what are we able to do for a long period of time that's sustainable? Because to get most of the benefits, it's something you have to keep doing over and over and over again. And it's not just a short-term thing to lose some weight for summer or something like that. It's something that we need to keep doing for a long, long time. So
there's no space for heroics here.
I think we have to do things that people are able to keep doing. I mean, there's maybe something interesting here. But if we take weight loss as an example, so I'd argue it's relatively straightforward to get people to lose weight. I know it's hard, but over 3 months, most people can lose some weight. The challenge is most people don't sustain the weight loss for 2 or 5 years. Some people do, but most people don't. So it's a long-term thing that's a challenge. But one of the things we can think about is the process that you need to get the weight off is not necessarily the same thing you need to do to keep it off. So when you say there's no need for heroics, sometimes it can be really helpful to go in hard initially and then transition to something that's more sustainable over time. So an example is there was a study called the DIRECT study, which was done at the University of Glasgow and University of Newcastle. So it's led by Professor Mike Lean and Professor Roy Taylor. And what that did is it took people with type 2 diabetes and essentially gave them what they call a total diet replacement diet. So they're 4 200-calorie shakes a day, which are nutritionally complete for between 3 and 5 months. And the idea is they lose between 10 and 15 kilograms of body weight. And then they have a food reintroduction phase to kind of keep that weight off. And what it found is about 46% of people at 1 year achieved diabetes remission. So they had their blood glucose levels not in the diabetes range. And it was about 35% at 2 years. But the key thing here was there was this initial hitting people hard, doing something that was quite intensive, and then transitioning into the longer term thing. So I think this 2-stage model of you might want to do something quite hard initially and then transition to something, keep it up, it is an approach I think works for at least some people.
That's really interesting, actually, because, there's the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine really champion this one change. And I guess that's what often is doable within the consulting room. You need that support and you need these big pathways and programs. In Scotland, we still have Counterweight Plus, which is based on that DIRECT trial. And they're just about to do this. Obviously, you know this because you work in Glasgow, but this is for all of our listeners across the UK. They're just about to do the digital version of that. Yeah. Actually, whilst we're on this subject, I wonder, have you been involved in research in providing these sorts of pathways digitally? Just thinking about that accessibility and at scale and all of that.
So Counterweight is being delivered digitally as well. It's not something that I'm directly involved with. I am working with Counterweight on another project that is going to come forward, looking at delivering GLP-1 treatment in primary care to see whether we can actually help prevent conditions happening in the future. So that program is going to be a combination of a GLP-1 plus a plus a digital support behavioral package that we're working with Counterweight to deliver. Is maybe something we can touch further in the future. But I think one of the key things here is we've now, in terms of body weight change, got a range of options which are greater than we had before, and I think that might make things open up the range of possibilities going forward.
What are you thinking there specifically?
So I think GLP-1s have changed the game. And I think it'll be one of these things that will be before GLP-1s and after GLP-1s. What we've got at them in the past was we were able to achieve maybe 10 to 15 kilograms of weight loss when people worked really, really hard at it. And some people were able to do that, but many people weren't able to do that. And keeping weight off was really hard. And a lot of it is because you've got all these biological drives to try and eat more food when you're at negative energy balance. And what the GLP-1s do is provide you support to take away those food cravings. One analogy I like to use is maybe a little bit like nicotine replacement therapy. So when someone's trying to stop smoking, it's really hard. But what nicotine replacement therapy does is it helps damp down the cravings and stuff, so you can put in place the behavior change is more easily that you might be able to sustain, and then eventually you might be able to come off it. So one way of thinking about GLP-1s is they might do that. That's not necessarily the way they're always being used now, but they can actually provide this scaffolding to help do a lot of the other things and make them easier to do. And then in time, some people might be able to wean themselves off the GLP-1. Some people won't be able to, but that might be a model that we can use going forward. So I think we need to use all the tools we have available to us. And I think something with physical activity, which I've been working on for 3 decades now, I think the focus on what we're trying to do with physical activity might change a little bit. Because in the past, we considered it for a number of things, including can it help with weight loss, right? Now I think we focus on a lot of the other benefits. So improving fitness and muscular strength, provide additional benefits over and above effects on weight. So I think if we take all the tools we have available, that increases the options. And I think we're in a much better position now than we were in 10 years ago when we didn't have so many options on the table, when we wanted to try and help people live healthier lives, but also to enable them to do things that they want to do. So if you are a bit fitter and a little bit lighter, everyday activities become a little bit easier. And so the quality of life changes might be substantial. And now we've got an opportunity to help people to improve their quality of life.
Because often there's that conversation about, well, actually, physical activity doesn't lead to weight loss per se. I've heard you say that a couple of times before. For people who maybe aren't clear on that, could you just sort of tell us a bit more about why that is?
So physical activity on its own probably leads to modest weight loss. So in the order of a couple of kilograms. And one of the reasons, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, unless you are very, very fit, your ability to burn calories doing physical activity is somewhat limited. So if you walk for 30 minutes, you probably are expending 200 to 300 calories, right? And if you think about the number of calories you need to burn to lose a kilogram, it's in the order of, I think it's 7,700 calories in a kilogram of adipose tissue. So it's a lot of 30-minute walks to do that. There's also some feedback mechanisms in that you might feel hungrier, so you might eat a little bit more food. So physical activity on its own, if you're using it to try and lose weight, is not that effective for most people. Some people are able to do lots of physical activity and lose lots of weight, but for most people it probably isn't. And the evidence is diet plus physical activity is better than either on their own. Where physical activity does come into its own is in the weight loss maintenance phase of keeping weight off. And there is now reasonable evidence that if you have increased physical activity in the weight loss maintenance phase, you're better at keeping the weight off. So again, we talked about this 2-stage process. For the initial weight loss, eating less food, either through a diet or using a GLP-1 drug to try and make you feel less hungry, so you eat less food. is probably the dominant mechanism. When you want to keep weight off, physical activity becomes really important. And one thing that we should maybe reflect on is that if somebody is very, very heavy, say they weigh 130 kilograms, doing physical activity will feel hard. And it might feel easier if they've lost some weight. So I think there's an argument for trying to get weight off predominantly using diet initially, and then bringing the physical activity in a little bit later when people are able to do it. They might enjoy it more, because the key thing is you do things that you enjoy. And if your first experience of physical activity, this is really, really hard, you might be turned off about it. But if you're a little bit lighter, your body moves a little bit easier, you might be more receptive to it later on. So I think we should be open. I think we should be open to that. The one other thing I'd like to add maybe before we move on is I think it's important to consider there's two different forms of activity we're interested in. One is the aerobic activity, so walking, running, cycling, all these things that burn lots of calories. And the other is resistance exercise or muscle strengthening activity. And often when we think about activity, we tend to think about the aerobic type activities. And resistance activities are forgotten. And there's quite a lot of evidence now that low strength is strongly related to a range of adverse health outcomes. People that do a muscle strengthening activities have improved outcomes in terms of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and all-cause mortality. And doing a combination of aerobic and resistance exercise seems to be better for things like HbA1c levels in people with diabetes. So I think doing resistance exercise early on can be important, not least because it can help you hold on to lean mass. Because when you lose weight, by whatever means, you'll lose a combination of lean mass and fat mass. Some of this is appropriate. If you're smaller, you don't need to have as much lean mass to support it. But there is a possibility that if you do some resistance exercise while you're losing weight, you can change the mix of weight that you lose, so it's more fat mass and less lean mass. And I think that's important. The dose of resistance exercise you need is probably smaller than you think. Probably 15 minutes a couple of times a week gets you most of the way there. So you don't need to do huge sessions at the gym. You need to do more than zero, but the amount more than zero might be less than people think.
That's really interesting and probably very accessible. So, should all GLP-1 medications or people going on to a weight loss diet of any description come with the instructions that you should be pairing this with resistance training to begin with, do you think?
So I think there's a benefit of doing that, and I think we're maybe not doing it as much as we could do. Mm-hmm. I think a challenge is with resistance exercise, most people think about going to the gym, mm-hmm. which can be quite a scary place for a lot of people. And it's very, very easy not to go to the gym. So I think we are developing things, and other people are as well, about home-based resistance programs using body weight and resistance bands. So I think doing resistance activity a couple of times a week is very, very helpful. I think we need to provide people with evidence-based programs which they can do in their home. And I think if we do that, then that would be a valuable thing to add to most people's weight loss programs, but also for general health. I think everybody should be doing resistance exercise.
That's brilliant. What is that to look like? Do you know, Jason?
It's quite interesting. If you look on various online things, you see people talking about their particular resistance exercise program that's special and gives you bigger benefits and other things. But I think it's actually quite simple. We need to do activities, resistance exercise, to strengthen our lower body and our upper body. And broadly, you can think about, you've got the front of your upper body and the back of your upper body. So the way that you get the front of your upper body is to do what you call a push exercise. So something like a chest press or a shoulder press where you push vertically. So a couple of pushes. You can probably do a minimal thing and just do one push. Some sort of pull, which gets your back. So you can do a vertical pull, so a pull-up if you're able to do it. Most people can't. But you can do a horizontal pull quite easily. So it's called a rowing exercise. One way you can do it is by looping a resistance band around your feet, have your feet in front of you, and pulling back. So a pull. And then two lower body exercises, one to get the front of your legs and one to get the back of your legs. So the one to get your front of your legs is a squat or a variation on a squat. So one way, a squat is essentially getting out of a chair without using your arms. That's a squat. You can do it with a weight if you're a bit stronger. And then a hinge motion, which is where you sort of have your body leaning forward and you pull it back up. So the classic hinge is a deadlift. It doesn't need to be that, but that gets the backs of your legs. So if you can kind of do those 4 exercises, and sometimes I would say do 2 pushes, a horizontal push and a vertical push, horizontal pull, vertical pull. And so 6 exercises is probably enough. The key thing here is you get about 70% of the benefit of doing 4 sessions a week from 1 session a week. So go from 0 to 0. From 0 to 1 gets you most of the way there. So 1 session a week is great. 2 sessions a week gets you almost all the way there. And the added benefit of doing 3 or 4 is quite minimal. The other thing is that when we think about the sets of exercise, people say, well, you do 3 sets of 10 or whatever. You get most of the benefit from set 1. So you only actually really need to get most of the benefit 1 set of the exercise. The key thing is to do the exercise until close to the point of failure. It doesn't actually need to be failure, but that's quite an easy sort of coaching point to tell someone. It's easy to prescribe it. Say basically, if you're doing, say, a chest press or a press up type exercise, which you can do on your knees or against a wall if you're not strong enough to do it on your feet, you do it until you can't do another one. Right? That's it. Done. Once. You get a resistance band around your legs, and then you pull that way until you can't do it anymore. You do some variation of a squat. You can do it with just body weight. You can do it standing up from a chair. You can do it with a jump in between to make it harder. If you're quite strong, you can put a weight on. But do that once until your legs feel they can't do anything else. A hinge you can do by sort of holding some weights in your hand and sort of standing up, or you can do it with a band around your legs. Couple times a week, 1 set to the point where you basically feel that you'd struggle to do another rep. That gets you most of the way there. So I think doing something that's very simple that you're able to do over and over and over and over again is what most people should be doing. And in some ways, I'm not fussed about the nuance, because the difference between doing something and doing something ideally might be 10%, whereas you get from 0 to 80% just from doing something. So I'm interested in getting people from 0 to 80.
Brilliant. And that's so practical as well. I don't think I would have necessarily, even having heard you speak a couple of times before, realised actually the importance of introducing resistance training early before cardiovascular. Because I guess as someone who enjoys cardiovascular exercise, I love walking, I love running, that comes through when you're enthusiastic about something, but actually you need the science to back it up. And you've just given us the understanding of that science as well. So that's really helpful.
Yes, I mean, aerobic activity is absolutely important, and we should be doing it. And there's lots and lots of evidence to show that it improves health outcomes. My subtle point is, if you're very heavy and you're trying to lose weight, it's just the sequencing of the two, and not doing it initially when you find it hard might be an option that works for some people. So
you've given us actually quite a lot. You've covered a lot of the questions that I have planned out for later. So whilst we're thinking about, what you need to do, when you were talking last time, you were talking about the beneficial effects and how long they last for and why it's important to do little and often. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and the evidence behind it?
Yes. So one of the things that we see with a lot of the benefits of activity, so benefits like reductions in blood pressure or improving insulin sensitivity, which is the ability of insulin, your body to sense insulin to control your blood sugar levels, or the changes in the triglyceride levels in your bloodstream, is you get this acute benefit after you've done an exercise session, which lasts maybe between 2 or 3 days. So the idea is if you do an exercise session, you're in this beneficial metabolic period for a couple of days, and then it kind of dissipates. And the idea is if you can do activity relatively frequently, probably at least every other day, you're constantly in this favorable metabolic state. And a large proportion of the benefit of being someone who's regularly active is from this repeated acute effect rather than necessarily a long-term training adaptation. There are bits of long-term training adaptation, but most of the benefit you get is from the last session you do. And if you look at evidence for, say, people with type 2 diabetes, looking at the benefits of activity on HbA1c, you find the biggest determinant of the effectiveness of a program is how frequently you do the activity. So frequency is probably the most important variable we need to think about when, particularly with people who already have maybe impaired metabolic health, is frequency of activity is important. I'd say at least every other day.
Every other day. Okay. That's trying to keep our patients going. How can we do that? How can we motivate people, Jason? Is there evidence behind the best way to motivate people?
Yeah, so we've done some work to try and see how do you get people to show up and keep showing up. And one of the studies we did a number of years ago was a study called Eurofit. So this was a study where we looked at men, because men are a hard to reach group. If a healthcare professional tells a man that they need to lose weight or be more active, they're generally less receptive to hearing that message than a woman. So what we did is we leveraged the fact that many men like their professional football club they support. And so we went to the football clubs and we got them to advertise to their middle-aged male fans. And we got them to do a program which was increasing physical activity and changing diet. But what we did is we trained the club coaches, like the youth team coaches, to deliver the intervention to the men. And this was clubs you've heard of. So Manchester City, Arsenal, Everton, Benfica, Porto, PSV Eindhoven, clubs like that. And it was really effective. We did a study on about 1,100 men. They lost a bit of weight. They increased their physical activity and it worked really well. So the key thing here is to do something people are prepared to do. And what men liked was showing up with other men, having the banter that you get in these sessions and people showing up. And we're having conversations now with a group called Walking Football. There's an organisation that does Walking Football. And Walking Football, I think, is really good because it's something that you can do as you get older, and you sort of when your knees give out and you can't maybe do normal football. It's something that keeps people active. So I think there's two things broadly you need to do. So William Morris said, in your house, you should only have things that are useful or you think are beautiful. And I think we can think of the same thing with physical activity. So we want it to be beautiful in that you want to do it. You're doing it for a reason other than your health. So a man that shows up to play five-a-side football, primary reason they're doing it is not because it's for their health, it's because they enjoy it, they meet with their mates, they get the banter and all those things. So if you want people to keep doing things, you need to do things that people enjoy. So it's kind of finding something that you want to do for other reasons than your health. The other thing that we can do is make it useful. So it's doing physical activity in a way that's embedded into your life. So one of the key things you see is if you ever go to Amsterdam, is everyone rides their bike. They don't ride their bike to get exercise. They ride their bike because that's just the easiest way to get from A to B. It's just that's what everyone does. So it's a very useful thing, and there's some evidence to suggest that life expectancy in the Netherlands is 0.6 years higher because everyone cycles everywhere. So it actually has a huge effect on population health. And we're doing some work now, developing an interval. We're doing a randomized controlled trial of an intervention to try and encourage people to cycle more for commuting. And the idea is that if people do that, they're getting it in. So whether it's raining or whatever, they need to get to work, so they're more likely to do it. So I think broadly thinking about one of those two things, and I think going to the gym just because you think it's good for you is probably not a way to keep people active. I enjoy going to the gym. I get something else out of it. So I enjoy doing it. But I'm not most people. And so just telling people just go to the gym probably only works if there's somebody that maybe wants to go to the gym, but there's other ways that they can be active.
And I know you've done research in other, you use the word hard to reach communities. I think there's another term that we're supposed to use, but other communities that are more difficult to engage. Can you give us some examples of other types of groups that you've researched into?
So we've done some work looking at ethnicity and health. Is that what you're getting at? So we've done quite a lot of work looking at trying to understand risk of diabetes in South Asians. Mm-hmm. So if you are of South Asian ethnic origin, you've got about 3 to 4 times the risk of diabetes compared to somebody who's of white European origin. And we've done some work to try and work out why that's the case. And we show that on average, South Asians have lower cardiorespiratory fitness. So cardiorespiratory fitness is your ability to use oxygen to do work. So somebody that's able to run fast over 10K has a high level of fitness. And what our data suggests is people who are South Asian might need to do more physical activity to get to the same level of fitness. We also showed the South Asians are a little bit less strong, so they might need to do more resistance exercise. and that when they gain weight, there's a bigger adverse consequence. So there are some biological differences in what might be optimal in different groups. And evidence shows that the interventions that we have to try and reduce diabetes, which typically involve taking people who have higher glucose levels than normal, but not high enough to diagnose diabetes. We call it pre-diabetes or impaired glucose regulation. If you give these people an intervention where you get them to increase their physical activity and lose a bit of weight, you reduce the number of people that end up developing diabetes. And what we find in South Asian populations is those interventions work, but they work a little bit less well than they do in other ethnic groups. And one of the things we're trying to do is explore why. And that's important because the reason why something doesn't work is important for understanding what to do next. So one reason it might not work is biologically, the same intervention has a different effect physiologically. If that's the problem, what you need to do is work out what the intervention might be, and it might be a different type of intervention. The other reason something might not work is the intervention would work, but people are less likely to engage because it's not appropriately tailored to them. So, for example, you've got a diet intervention and it's not using foods that people typically eat if they come from South Asian countries, right? So they kind of don't engage with it so much. And if that's the case, then what you need to do is do the same intervention, but work out a way of culturally making it culturally more appropriate. So understanding which of those two is the case is really, really important. There is some evidence that's probably a bit of both. And we probably need to do some work to both make things more culturally appropriate, but also understand what those interventions might be. In the SCOMIS study, which is the GLP, so it's a Scotland Cardiometabolic intervention study, which we're designing now, looking at using GLP-1 drugs in primary care. We are deliberately targeting people in lower SES communities because these are the people that have less access. And so what we're hoping to do is by targeting people in lower SES communities, we might reduce health inequalities, as well as hopefully having bigger downstream effects on health service utilization and events, because what you find is there's quite a big social gradient in terms of adverse health outcomes. So we're targeting the people who have the most risk, and also these are the people who might have less access to the GLP-1 drugs privately. So we're trying to address health inequalities in a range of different ways.
And that study that you just mentioned there, how big is that going to be?
So we're in the research design phase at the moment, and we need to submit a protocol sort of in September, and then hopefully if that gets approved, we go to the study. So we will have, in the intervention arm, 2,500 people will be given GLP-1 drugs over 3 years. And then we're going to follow up till 6 years. And we'll have a control arm as well that won't have GLP-1. So it'll be relatively big and relatively long.
Yeah, it sounds like a fascinating trial going forward. So we shall watch this space with interest. That is a subject which is very close to my heart. I was just pulling together some information for a discussion with the Deep End group about lifestyle medicine in the Deep End. So I may quote you on that as things that are going on. If that's okay, Jason.
What are you going to say to your Deep End colleagues?
What am I going to say? Well, my goodness, we've got 20 minutes. So my approach is that actually I am a GP working in a deep end practice, and I think it's needed there more than anywhere else. That unfortunately lifestyle medicine is, whilst not a protected term, it can sometimes be misrepresented. It is this evidence-based clinical care that supports behaviour change, meeting the patient where they are, focusing on the pillars of health. And then I think the most important thing is that we're meeting patients where they are, and we're making meaningful shared decisions with them. We're not giving them lifestyle advice. We're not telling people what to do. We're working on their self-efficacy, all of these things that anyone who's heard me speak before will have heard me say all of those things. But that's what I'm really passionate about. So it's great to hear that there's sort of research that is focusing on the groups that we are working with day to day.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
So you have a relatively short time with these patients.
Yeah.
Right, and you're normally having to deal with something else as well as this. So what advice can you give and support can you give in, say, the 3 minutes that you've got? What's the first thing that you do? Or
Jason, you've just turned the tables on me. I thought I was interviewing you. The first thing, Jason, is it depends. It depends what the patient is. It depends on the context. It depends how well I know them. But usually the discussions I have with patients, number one, they always overrun. Anyone who knows me will know that I continue to have on my personal development plan that I will run to time next year. That is an ongoing piece of work. I think, Jason, it just depends on what the patient's after. But some of the most impactful conversations, the ones that you expect the least. So I will always seek permission to have a lifestyle discussion with people. And it's amazing, actually, it's often surprising the people who are the most invested in wanting to talk about what they can do for themselves, seeking advice, wanting to know where they can find out more information. And then it's about attaching people to the community assets that you have. I'm trying to think of an example for you. I did actually have, do you know what? I hope you won't mind, and I'll keep it as anonymous as possible, but I had a relatively young man in recently who's had a heart attack already. And he came in with a list of, he's been saving them up for me, typical. And he had a list of 5 things. And I said, just tell me what they all are. And then we'll just see which one matters the most to you today and see what we can do. And actually what mattered most to him was that he wasn't sleeping. But by letting him talk about not being able to sleep, all these other issues which crossed all the pillars of health came out. And actually by the end of the consultation, we'd spoken about priorities, we'd spoken about all the other factors, the overwhelming stress, he'd taken on too much, he had too many responsibilities. And I stopped him at one point, I was like, let me just ask you a question. Do you use your phone in bed at night? And he was like, yeah, I'm answering questions all the time. I was like, right, okay, well, do you mind me saying that's probably where you need to start? And he was like, oh yeah, that's where I need to start. And actually, if you can find one thing that you can work on with a patient, he stood up, he said, I think you were the right doctor for me to come and talk to you today. You're right, I didn't need another pill. I've got plenty of those already. I'm going to go away and have a think about what I need to do. So actually, I didn't tell him anything apart from identified, okay, the major problem to one of your problem lists here, you've got your phone on in bed at night. That needs to stop. And then let's start with everything else. So it wasn't a physical activity focus to that consultation. It was what matters to this patient. And it's not always immediately clear. Sometimes you just need to let these things evolve.
Okay. Can I ask you 2 more questions? I am turning the tables. The first is, how common do you think what you did is? Do you think all your colleagues are doing the same thing?
I think we all practice in very different ways. It would have been very easy just to comment on the dermatological things that he started with in his list. But I think a lot of GPs do the lifestyle medicine approach without realising it.
Okay.
It's good holistic care.
Okay. So my next question is, we do a bunch of research on lots of different things. You as somebody on the front line, who's dealing with real people in the real world, what are the key bits of evidence or things about effectiveness would be really helpful for you so that you can, in your 3 minutes you have with somebody to talk about this, do that more effectively?
Oh, that's a good question. I suppose the things that I find the most useful are the things that I can use often. So one of my favourite, and again, I've mentioned this in many talks and many podcasts before, but one of my favourite infographics, because I love an infographic, I think a picture tells 1,000 words, particularly for physical activity, is that World Health Organization dose-response curve on physical activity.
Okay.
Because I'm often dealing with the red man in the corner who's sitting in his chair, and if I can get him to move a little bit more, that's where the biggest gains are going to be. And having something simple that I can use in just about any situation where that seems relevant, which is often, by the way, I can point to that and say, listen, this is what I'm interested in. This is where we could start. So I guess it's about having easy to use resources. And I know Moving Medicine has just come out with some patient-facing resources based on both condition and also symptoms. I don't know if you've had anything to do with that, Jason, or aware of it, but
I've seen some of the stuff. I'm not involved with them. Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing that I can point to patients at. But working in a pocket of deprivation, not everyone has access to the internet. So sometimes it's about having posters for the waiting room. It's very basic where I work, but that's not necessarily relevant to anyone. I would love to hear from anyone who is listening from this who can answer that question. You've just put me on the spot there, Jason. I thought I was asking you all the questions.
Well, you can ask me some questions now.
Was that what you were thinking I might say?
I don't know what you were going to say. I guess one of the things that we're doing, so we can, sometimes we do things that are really getting to niche detail type things, and they help with scientific understanding, they help with biological mechanisms. But the broad messages about what we need to do are probably not going to change based on that. You might change some of the nuance, but we know what the broad messages are. And I think that the challenge we have is, I think you mentioned at the top, the implementation gap. And I think the big challenge we have is long-term behavior change, not initiating behavior change. Initiating behavior change is one set of problems, and we've got solutions that work for at least some people. There's kind of things we need to do for the people that they work. I think where we've got the big challenge is how to help people sustain behavior change in their real lives, which are busy, and you have setbacks. You might have, because what you sometimes find is people are doing really, really well until something happens in their life. And then they fall off the wagon, and then it's really, really hard to get back on it again. And so it's trying to work out how we actually help support people over the long term. And I think that's the part of my job that I'm most interested in just now. Is how we can keep people in the real world sort of having a lifestyle that's not perfect, but good enough for a long period of time. So I'm kind of good enough is good enough is kind of my I don't think anyone needs to be optimal. I think optimal is something that is not really worth achieving. Most people are going to fail at that. I think if we can get most people good enough, that I'll be happy with that.
And I suppose the this is where, doing face-to-face, one-to-one medicine in small rooms can be frustrating because you're going against the grain often. Behaviour change within a society that is encouraging us to sit still. It is not encouraging us to be active. It's not encouraging us to eat well or sleep well. That's the difficulty. And I guess, lifestyle medicine as the BSLM tries to sort of bridge that gap between sort of front door medicine and public health and somewhere in the middle. It would be lovely if we could, cause this wholesale cultural shift so that we're not working against the grain all the time. I don't know how on earth we're going to achieve that. But, the fact that there is a growing swell of people willing to practice this on the coalface, I think is so important.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think one of my favourite phrases is both and. So we kind of need to do that. We also need to try and see whether we can alter societal things and pull those bigger levers as well. And I think we need to lobby to make those changes. But I think we can't just rely on the food system to change and just wait for that to happen. There's other things that we need to be doing in the interim as well.
So we have done a whistle-stop tour, and you've turned the tables on me, which I wasn't expecting. And I wonder whether you can, you've sort of slightly moved us towards a bit of a call to action. So, the people that this is generically aimed at is people in primary care who are trying to promote physical activity. We're thinking about in the context of cardiometabolic health. So what would be your take-home messages? I've written a few things down here that I've taken from you. And by the way, I frequently now quote you on that both and, not either or. I hope you don't mind, but it's on just about every slide I now do.
Of course. I think I will have stolen it from someone else as well. So I don't have copyright on the term.
What do you think, from your research point of view, we should be focusing on from a cardiometabolic health point of view? What are the little gains that we can do over and over again, do you think?
Yeah. So I think the key thing is doing things over and over again. So it's a couple of bits. If you are heavier than you want to be, I think considering weight loss and weight loss maintenance as two different things, I think is important. There's often discussion about, well, just do something sustainable and easy. And this is one of the things where the evidence is probably the opposite of common sense. So the biggest determinant of weight loss at 1 year is weight loss at 1 month, right? So people that go in hard are better off at 1 year. So I think going in hard initially and then moving into a cruise phase where you do something else is probably important. Things like the total diet replacement that Direct used and is it Counterweight Plus seems to work quite well. And one of the reasons it works quite well is it takes all the choice and thought out, because you think, what am I going to eat next? And I've got all these things there. If you go, I've got the shake and that's it, right? You don't need to think. It takes all that thought out. So you can basically get the weight off, not think about food because you don't have any choice. And then when you've got some weight off, keep going. And I think one of the things that the counterweight dietitians do very well is help that food reintroduction phase, actually how you do things going on. So I think that works quite well. So the how you get somewhere and what you do long term might be different things. Physical activity is important, and I think it's important to recognize there's two types of activity that we need to do broadly. There's the aerobic type activity, and one way to do that is just to get a step counter. Everyone has a step counter because your phone is a step counter now, and everyone has one of those. And try and look at your baseline level of steps and gradually build it up. So rule of thumb is 1,000 steps is about 10 minutes of walking, right? So if you can kind of see wherever you are, if you're sitting at 3,000 steps, try and increase to 3,400 or 4,000 for a couple of weeks and see whether you can go further. With the dose-response relationship, you mentioned this earlier, is the steepest part is the first bit. So wherever you're at, the first bit you do is going to give you the biggest benefit, and then you get diminishing returns. With steps, a key point is we hear the number 10,000. The number you need is probably much less than 10,000. It's probably 7,000 to 8,000 for plateaus. So you don't need to get to 10,000. So if you can hit 8,000, that's probably good enough. On top of that, do some resistance type activities. We talked about it earlier on. It doesn't need to be anything fancy, just major muscle groups, a couple of times a week, one set to close to failure. Get you most of the way there. The other thing that I want to say briefly, and I was chatting to my dad about this yesterday, it's often with older people, we are scared to give them the activity that would benefit them. So if you look at classes with older people, they have sort of very, very light weights. They do things that you don't. But what you need to do to actually, if you want to keep your capacity, you need to keep pushing up to that barrier, right? So I was saying to my dad, so you need to lift heavy weights, not to get stronger, but to keep what you've got going forward. And so the idea of people saying, oh, well, you're lifting bean tins, that probably doesn't cut it for most people. I remember doing something with my dad, and I was getting some weights to lift that. No, it's far too heavy. And then it's like he was able to do 8 reps. And they go, no, that's the weight you need. And so I think one of the challenges here, really, really important challenge, is the appropriate load for people is generally higher than people think the appropriate load is. And it's giving people confidence to say, look, this is the load you should do, and it's safe, it's fine, right? You need to be going at using a weight that's relatively heavy for you. So relatively heavy for an 80-year-old is very different from relatively heavy for a 20-year-old. But doing something that isn't pushing you is probably not going to be optimal. So I think that's a key take-home message. I think is maybe different from almost the popular conception of what we should be doing with older. So things like chair-based activities and things like that. We need to be pushing people a little bit and not being scared to push people. We don't want 80-year-olds doing sort of maximal sprints, but probably a little bit more than we are generally comfortable doing, I think would be a take-home message.
Brilliant, Jason. Well, listen, I'm going to be thinking about what you said earlier on. Simple, but not easy. I think that might be the way around that it is. And the 1,000-day plan, I love that. I may continue to quote you on that as well. Listen, thank you so much for giving us a whistle-stop tour and some really good practical advice. You know, how little can you get away with is the tagline, I think. I might even call the whole episode that, Jason. Brilliant. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Suzy. Yeah, let's catch up again soon. Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Callum. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. We are so grateful to the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine for their support in producing these podcasts. And we wholeheartedly share their vision of transforming healthcare and levelling health inequalities through lifestyle medicine. If you want to find out more, please head to bslm.org.uk. Although catering for healthcare professionals, this podcast is for everyone. If you enjoyed it, please share it. And we love hearing from you. So do reach out. Thanks for listening.